Welcome to Inflection Points, a podcast about technology and big ideas from the office of the CTO at Extreme Networks. Tim, I have a very personal question.
I'm suddenly very nervous.
Were you ever a competitive athlete in your youths?
For those that know me, they would laugh very hard right now. I had one shining moment as a competitive athlete as a Ute, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I did play soccer or football for one season. Our team scored one goal all season. That goal was scored by yours truly. Yes, I know, exciting.
Look at you, Mr. Beckham.
Well, I think it was given to me even though we may have scored in the wrong goal. But that
they cared.
Well, yes. So that was the end of my professional sports career. How about yours?
I did a little more than that.
I certainly hope so.
A smidge. Yeah, I grew up playing a lot of competitive sports. My main one was volleyball, did basketball, softball, swimming, a few other things. My mother did not believe in letting me have a moment to relax. Always must be doing something. So yes, I played a lot of competitive sports. But you know what, Tim, fear not. There is a new sport that has arrived for Generation Z, and I think you might still have a chance.
Oh, if there's only an opportunity for me to be a champion one more time.
Well, you can potentially in esports.
Fantastic.
Esports is growing like crazy. I mean, it's been around for the last 5 to 7 years, but it's just been taking off since the pandemic.
Absolutely. And you know, the interesting thing for me is that this is the ultimate distributed sport, right? So
it is.
You can play it at home. You can play it in arenas. There are, in fact, esports arenas where spectators get together, and there's commentators, and there's music, and there's excitement, and there's gaming. Like, this is a really big thing. It's not just people sitting at home by themselves. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, it's been pushed back out to that concept. But what's interesting is that this can tie in very well with the concept of the infinite enterprise.
And that is exactly what I was thinking, is that it does tie in very nicely with the infinite enterprise and this idea that the pandemic was a unique event that has accelerated technology and will enable us to have the same experiences, whether you are in the center, whether you're in that arena in downtown LA watching your favorite esports team, or if you are sitting in your living room, far, far away from downtown LA, you can still have the same experience, whether you are watching the game or if you are participating. The Infinite Enterprise will enable the same experience wherever you are.
And just think of all the opportunities for that distribution of consumption, right? So you can be watching it like you would watch any other sports event with, again, those commentators feel, live. They're in your living room at that moment. So it's much bigger than just playing a game. There's so much more to the experience. And I think that's something that the Infinite Enterprise can either bring or learn from, which is really cool. So today we're going to speak with somebody who's big in the industry, as they say. We're going to be speaking with Danny Brady. And Danny is a senior data engineer at Cloud9 Esports. They're kind of like the Yankees organization of esports. So they field a team, and multiple teams, in fact, across multiple different game genres or titles. And Danny's going to walk us through, some of the history of esports, what the pandemic has done to esports, and how they've learned to adapt during this time. And also give us an interesting glimpse into what he thinks is the future of esports. And I think that's going to tie in really well with the Infinite Enterprise concept, being able to understand how the Infinite Enterprise can support esports, or what we can learn from esports to make sure that the Infinite Enterprise can support that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the key areas and in competitive sports where the Infinite Enterprise and esports together where they can go, it's unstoppable. For other competitive sports, I think there's still a question of how do we make it more real in the future in the Infinite Enterprise. But for esports, they haven't really missed a beat since the pandemic. So I'm really keen to see what he has to say.
Me too. Let's go listen to Danny.
Let's do it.
Danny, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I am perhaps from a different generation, as Carla likes to point out quite often, and I'm sort of coming at this esports thing from an outside perspective. I would love to understand what Cloud9 does, what you do, and what is the world of esports. Can you give me an idea of how this has become what it is?
Yeah, so my name's Danny Brady. I'm the director of technology at Cloud9. I've been here for about a year and a half. And yeah, Cloud9 was founded in 2013, and we're basically an esports organization, which means that we have professional video game teams across about a dozen different titles at any given time. So that means we have players of the video games, but we also have staff and everything required to actually play these games professionally in different leagues and tournaments and things like that. And esports in general is just the idea of video games as a sport. So those are across lots of different platforms. We have PC games, there's console games, right? There's team games, there's solo games. So there's lots and lots of different types of games. We participate in several of them. And there are also many more that we don't.
That sounds huge. It sounds like a lot to manage. You're talking about teams of players, but also people managing that and the experience that they need to provide for such a diverse group of athletes, I guess is the actual term here, right? Yeah. What does that look like from your traditional, arena environment, as it were, where people are out there crashing into each other on fields or hitting things with sticks? What does that look like when people are actually gaming as a sport? Can you give me an idea of what that experience is like?
Yeah. So up until recently, a lot of the esports tournaments and leagues actually took place in arenas or studios, and they would get together the teams. So they would be the players. Most teams have coaches, there's managers, just like a traditional sports team. And they would gather in the studio. Often there'd be an audience or, fans. And they would, it looks a little different than bashing into each other on a field, but they sit across from each other usually on their computers or consoles, and they play the game against each other. And then there's usually interviews and things like that afterwards, very much like a traditional esport.
Wow. So I would imagine that the pandemic has really impacted esports and their ability to get together and to participate. But how has it seems like it might be one of the few sports that haven't necessarily been as impacted, because I would imagine you've found ways to continue on with the leagues and the tournaments, even while the pandemic's going on. What has changed during the pandemic, and how have you guys addressed that?
Yeah, so there definitely have been changes. Most leagues and tournaments are not taking place in studios right now with fans. Certain countries and certain places are still doing that, or at least in studios without fans. But I can speak a little bit to League of Legends, which is kind of our most prominent team. They were in the middle of a season when the pandemic hit in March of last year. And at that point, they were meeting in a studio in Los Angeles with hundreds of fans there. And LA shut down, and they had to no longer do that and meet in person. And it took the league only, I think it was a week or two, to figure out what they were going to do. And they started games up again remotely right after that. So yeah, instead of the players gathering in the studio and playing against each other in the same room, they started playing from their rooms essentially. So the players would be wherever they lived, or sometimes an office, but often in the beginning, it was just their rooms, and they would play the same games with their teammates against the same teams, but it was all remote. And eventually it took a little doing, but they got the broadcasts and stuff up to be very professional looking again. They used to do that in the studio. And then they started doing that all remote also. And I think it took them a little while, but they did a really good job. And now at this point, or even for months now, most leagues and tournaments have been taking place remotely, like across all esports.
Is there a sense that that feels different for those players? I mean, obviously, once you're in an arena or a studio or something like that, there's a hype element of that. You know, how has that affected how the teams and the athletes respond to that experience?
Yeah, I think they do miss the fans. I know that, again, League of Legends, the first season that got interrupted and then played remote, Cloud9 actually won the season. And usually that takes place in the studio with all your fans cheering and shouting. This time it took place at their gaming house. So there was a dozen people there, the players and coaches, and they celebrated with each other. But they missed out on having the hundreds of fans cheering for them. So I know it was a little bit of a bummer for them to finally win and not be in front of an audience. But, you know, it was still good to win. So I know they missed that for sure. And by now, most organizations are back to meeting together, like the organization is together and the team is together, because they're basically quarantining together at this point.
Oh, I see.
But they're still not with the fans for the large part at this point. So I know that they like being together with their teammates. At least there's at least some camaraderie and, you know, friendships there, compared to literally just being in your rooms, super remote.
Right.
So they're at least like getting back a bit, but they still want to get back in the studios when they can.
Well, so it sounds like both after the pandemic, it sounds like there is definitely a desire to return to the way that it was. Do you see anything, though, in this experience that you think will stick for the foreseeable? Will it change the possibility to form new teams, or that maybe weren't able to come together before? Or do you think there's going to be anything that will change because of it?
Yeah, I think that there are certain things that came up because of this that will allow for better remote play in the future. So again, League of Legends is the one I know the most about. When they used to play in studio, the servers that they played on were local, either to the studio or very close to the studio. And when they went from that to being remote in their rooms, they had a whole host of other problems, like the individual internet lines of 10 different players and all the broadcasters and things like that. And, you know, especially in the beginning, it was noticeable when somebody would lag. Like, that's very important to the game, obviously. If you would lose audio with someone, you'd have to pause. There were a lot more pauses of the game for technical issues that just weren't a problem when they were in like a controlled environment in a studio with servers local to the studio or nearby. So I think those things have shown what would need to change to be able to be more remote. But certain leagues are a bit more remote than that anyway. League of Legends happens to have all their 10. Well, in North America, all their teams are in Los Angeles, so they're at least very close to each other.
Right.
But I know that in other leagues in other countries, the server locations are really important. And I think that's something that they are reconsidering across esports again, is like how to best position their servers and things like that for being remote if they can't be in a studio all the time. That's
an interesting and a really interesting point about the geography and the location of servers. You know, when I think back to my my only times playing video games back in, well, I won't say when, but you know, they had invented the idea of LAN games, so everybody could sit together in a room, and they'd bring their giant PCs over, and we would all play together. And then the internet sort of became the thing, and then there was challenges being able to sit at home and play on gaming servers out there, and they would get overloaded. And you know, are these gaming servers? These are, I assume, specific to esports and specific to those players. Is it a significant technology challenge to be able to get those servers up and running close to the users and be able to maintain a decent performance for everybody?
Yeah, so I don't know too many details about the servers themselves, but I do know that their location and their geography is definitely something that's highly considered. And some of the factors of that. So again, League of Legends is really interesting because all the pro teams in North America, I've said, are in Los Angeles. However, you know, that's pretty far on one side of the country. If you had the servers in Los Angeles, then the people on the East Coast playing the game would have a lot of lag and high ping. So what they've decided to do, Riot is the owner of the servers in the game, they have their servers in Chicago. So they tried to put them central, somewhere with good internet, stuff like that, so that people on the West Coast and the East Coast can have roughly equal ping, although it's not equal. That being said, for the official tournaments that they play, they have a special server in Los Angeles that's just for the pro players. And that's what they play on for their official matches. And there's a very different ping. It goes from their normal 60 ping to 6 ping or something like that. And that is a kind of a ongoing controversy, is that they practice on a high ping and then play their games on a low ping. And that is not the case in certain other regions of the world, where generally just the countries are smaller. Like United States is a very big country. And, you know, if you have one server in Korea, for example, in South Korea, like everyone is physically close, much closer to it than Los Angeles is close to Chicago. So they are used to practicing and playing their real games on the similar ping, a very low ping. And a lot of people would argue that that gives them an advantage versus us. And I know that in the United States, they've talked about adding more servers, because that's always an option, right? Just have more servers. But if you do that, that breaks up the player base, right? The East Coast players are playing on the East Coast servers and the West Coast players are on the West Coast servers, and that they've decided that they don't want to do that. And it's especially a prominent issue with League of Legends because all of the pro teams and the best players are on the West Coast in Los Angeles. So that would take away like the ability for someone on the East Coast to ever play against them in practice, basically.
So the individual experience here is significant. You know, when you're all sitting in one arena, you have an infrastructure that allows for everybody to have that similar experience, because they're all plugged in the same way, in the same fashion, and they have the same kind of performance between, you know, the servers and them. But once you stick them out into the wider world, it becomes a bigger challenge. That's really fascinating, because, you know, from a traditional sports perspective, you know, everybody goes onto a field and they all play together and it's fine. Nobody's playing individually remotely with, you know, the limitations of connections here and there. So that's a really unique challenge. Do you see, you know, you mentioned that there's these, you know, disparities between, you know, high latency, low latency performance. Is that sort of the steroid use of esports gaming in some way, that it's a you know, it's a challenge that needs to be overcome so that everybody can agree upon the level playing field, even if they're distributed?
Yeah, I guess it kind of is, in a way, the steroids of esports. I know that, right, latency is kind of a very obvious one that people are pretty familiar with. Another example of that is like the actual hardware that they play on. Right? Like if my computer is just way faster than your computer, I probably have an advantage. So again, I think when they play in the studios and things like that, they're on a standard, you know, they're all on the same computer with the same length internet line, you know, everything is very controlled versus, yeah, when you're in the wide world, everyone's on their own computer, and some people's are better than others, obviously, and some people's have issues. So there are a lot more factors to consider when esports are remote versus when they are in one location and highly controlled.
So they're not actually using their own computers when they're in an arena. There are sort of standardized machines that are, you know, sort of centralized and controlled for them, as opposed to when they're at home.
I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty certain, yes, there are standard computers. Often an interesting thing is they'll bring their own peripherals.
Oh, really?
So they will bring their own keyboard and mouse usually. So that they are used to that. But the computer itself, I believe, is standard.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So how have you seen the market grow over the years? I know that I feel like it's pretty well known that Generation Z is very into esports. But have you seen any interest grow during the pandemic? And then also, how do you see esports evolving over the next, 5 years?
It does seem like during the pandemic, when everything had to go remote, esports seem to have had a bit of an easier time than, I would say, traditional sports, right?
I would say so.
When they couldn't meet and they couldn't play their games. And then it took them, I think, quite a bit longer to figure out how to start doing that safely, which most sports have done and are being played now. But I think it just took them longer because of their requirement to be in the same location. Yeah, I don't know too much about the growth. I do think it's growing. I think one thing to consider beyond just like the fan growth, which I think is probably there, is actually how the pandemic has affected companies themselves. So, esports companies and organizations like Cloud9, as well as the video game producers and the league runners and things like that, have all been affected similarly by the pandemic. And they've had to be, they all went remote also. And I know that like their staff is changing. If they had staff for running live events, they haven't had live events in a year. So you have to move these people to other projects or let them go or something. So, that is affecting the leagues as well. But it does seem like fan growth is there. And I think that's a bit of a testament to esports' like viewership experience, right? Most people don't go to the studio to watch the game. Most people are watching on Twitch or on YouTube or something like that online. And the experience, I don't think, was drastically hurt by the pandemic once some of the initial issues were sorted out, compared to going to a football game with 80,000 people. Right. Like that's not a thing anymore. I think that that's something that has helped esports a bit, is that the viewership experience is less changed, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing that the entire industry was able to pivot so quickly. And to your point earlier, be able to have such a great viewership experience a couple of weeks later. Obviously, so many other sports were not able to do that. So it's incredible that it's been able to pick up. Now, I think we've heard that you also run a camp as well. Is that correct? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cloud9 is starting and running an esports camp for kids. And this is a pretty new project for us. It started last year. It's sort of in beta. It's getting going. The camp is called Training Grounds. We liken it to something like Little League, where you get a bunch of kids together, you put them on teams, you have coaches, we certify our coaches, and then they practice and play games against each other, just like you would in a Little League or a soccer league or something like that, with some obvious differences that our players are not actually together. They are remote wherever they live. So it's another example of being able to be remote, but also together. And that community and that league is something that we're working on very much right now. But we're excited to be running camps in a couple of different titles right now. And we're hoping to just keep growing it and growing it.
Now, is that something that would eventually translate, hopefully in the future, into actually having a physical camp where people get together in a studio and, maybe it's a week-long or a month-long thing where people are sort of co-resident and being able to experience that as well? Because it's interesting, esports with people moving from the arena and going remote. You're starting remote. Is there an opportunity to bring them back in so that they're co-resident, they're actually involved in interacting with other people?
That's a great question. I think there is an opportunity for that in the future. This program started kind of during the pandemic. So whether or not we wanted to do that in the first place, we couldn't do it. So it was forced to be remote. But also, I think the fact that it can be remote is what makes it really powerful and scalable and, interesting. An interesting project is that it can be remote all the time. And there's not actually a need to do an in-person camp like there is with other sports. Playing soccer by yourself, is a lot more boring than playing League of Legends with your friends online.
That is fair.
Fair enough. And what would the camp experience be like? Like, what is a day in the life of a camper? Because, I'm thinking, a regular summer camp, there's, swimming and what have you. Like, what happens in an esports camp? Or have you built that out yet? I'm very curious to understand what that looks like.
Yeah. So right now, most of our programs currently are like after school programs because school is happening, and the campers are all kids. So they're in school. So the way it works right now is there's often a set time where the teams will get together with their coaches and they'll practice. So that's like going down to the basketball court and practicing with your coach. However, you log online at the same time as your team and you play games together and review them together and things like that. Another part of it that we're building out is kind of the community aspect of it. So most of these video games, the teams are rather small. They're like 3 people, 5 people, a coach. So they're a little bit smaller than like a traditional sports team would be. So we want to make it feel a little bit more like a community than just 4 other people and your coach. So we've been building out like community chat rooms and events and things like that where players across different teams and even across different camps potentially can interact. There's some interesting things because the campers are so young. There's things like homework help and things like, that you wouldn't really think of as traditional like camp activities. But since we're trying to build them into a community, those are some of the things that are relevant to a lot of the campers. So they help each other out.
Wow, that's fantastic. And what are the things that support this? What do you need? We talked about the gaming servers and the location of the challenges of latency. What do you need from technology to be able to put this together? And what would be your needs going forward? If you're, thinking, blue sky, what are those technologies that would enable this camp?
So the gaming servers are certainly important, right? We couldn't do this without gaming servers. But I think the technologies that help make it feel a little bit more, I don't know, like what people are used to from camps, like the community and the camaraderie and the closeness. I think those are the technologies that matter more and need more improvement in the future. So those are things like, right, we have text chat rooms, and a chat room is fine. Everyone is used to chat rooms, right? Everyone knows how they work and can use them. But I think that's different than being in a room with someone and having a conversation. So then there's better than text chat rooms, right? There's voice chat rooms, and we use those. And those are probably better than text, but worse, again, I think, than being in a room with someone and seeing their face and seeing how they react and, all their bodily cues and things like that. So what do we have? We have video calls, right? So we use those sometimes.
Right.
And again, those are better, but still not, I don't think, as good as being in a room with actual people and interacting with them in a physical space, or a seemingly physical space at least. And that's kind of the best I think we have to offer right now is, video calls. And I'm hoping that in the future we will have something even better than that. I know people are working on it with augmented reality and virtual reality and all that stuff. So I think finding ways to make, while being remote, to make it feel even more personal, I think is kind of the most important thing that would help an esports camp versus a traditional camp, make it feel more like a traditional camp, more so than the game servers being lower latency or closer to you. I think those are less important.
So we have VR for the game experience, but also VR for the camper experience, so that they can, not to get very Inception on this, but the ability to look at a sort of virtual reality environment in which they're gaming, but also a virtual reality environment in which they're interacting individually, so they don't feel alone. Even to the point of holography or something like that, so that people can sort of see each other and even though they're alone, there's still some kind of interaction. That sounds really fascinating. Is that sort of the view you have, like the integration of technology into the experience?
I think that's my view. I don't know that I can speak for the camp's view, but I do think that something like that, obviously being worked on, would be a huge next step, not just for esports camps, but for everything, for remote work life and everything. So yeah, I think that's something that's lacking right now, being remote versus being local to people, that could be improved somehow with these things we're talking about, with these technologies.
It sounds like there's things that we can learn from even a corporate environment, or that kind of thing, from esports, and how you're really on the forefront of working with Gen Z and the expectations that they have for the technologies to be able to deliver the experience they want. Do you see much of that esports technology potentially spilling over into other environments? Are you guys the leaders in that kind of experiential environment?
I think that esports is actually, it's like a good analogy for the remote work life. And then Cloud9 is perfect because it's both. I am not a player, I'm not a camper, but I work for an esports company. It's been really interesting for me as one of the older Cloud9 employees, getting to work with a lot of the Gen Z and I don't know, Gen X and the younger crowd, and how technically adept they are at lots of different things that I am not. They're really used to community technologies like Discord, for example, where they will hang out with their friends and listen to music together, and they will chat while playing a game and watch a movie together, all on Discord or something like that. And that's just something that, like, I didn't grow up with and I am not used to doing. And I think that this generation is already used to that. And I think they're very eager for more and more better technologies and, more personal feeling technologies. So yeah, I do think that like esports, since it's generally a younger demographic, although I would argue that it's probably not as young as many people think it is, the average demographic age is like going up as people were fans and remain fans of esports. So it's not like the average fan of Cloud9 is 17 years old. They're probably 23 years old or 24, something like that. Oh, wow. It's just older than most people's perception would be.
Well, and I would imagine as the more popular it becomes, the more awareness there is for, generations like you and I, elder millennials, maybe, that kind of, early 30s, although I'm not in my early 30s, but the early 30s level we're becoming more involved. And I think that's, to your point, I think it's going to get even more and more popular as, us old folks start to go, oh, wait, this is a thing. People are interested in this.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people didn't know it was a thing, right? What's interesting is when I show people older than me, like my parents, let's say, about esports, they can get into it. And it's really funny. It's nothing they've never played the games. They've never known anything about esports. But I think because like the production quality is good and they understand that like there's a team and a community and we could cheer for them. And like, all of those things that we're kind of used to with traditional sports totally apply to esports. And it allows a different generation that's not used to it to become involved and interested. And the more people that do that, the more perspectives there are, which only help, the community grow and hopefully the technology evolve and all of these things that will just make it better and better.
So, I think that there's so much for esports to do, and there's still so much. It's still kind of in its infancy because it only has been around, for a handful of years, and there's so much more to grow. Where do you see it going in the future? What do you think the future holds for esports?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Right, it's a big one.
I don't think it's going.
If you have your crystal ball,
yeah,
handy,
exactly.
That would be great.
If you could tell us, we won't hold it against you.
Right. Well, I definitely don't think it's going away. I think it's only growing. And I think we've seen that over the last decade or so of esports. Cloud9 was founded in 2013. So I think it's one of the older organizations. But I think some of the things that you are starting to see that people don't expect, I think, is how popular it is. And really, there's a few events I can speak to that like kind of show that are just really unexpected for like the uninitiated. So for example, there are certain esports tournaments, like world tournaments, where they bring the best teams from around the world together. Well, they used to bring them together physically, and they would actually sell out a football stadium. There'd be 80,000 fans in a stadium together watching a video game. And I think that shocks a lot of people that there's like that many fans in one place interested in esports. And, there's that many people times 100 around the world watching these games. Where I think it's going, or I hope it's going, is to even continue to improve the viewership experience, because as an esport or a sport, that's kind of what keeps a sport going, is if it's fun to watch. I think it's very similar right now to a traditional sport. You'll see an analyst desk often, they'll talk about it. There are commentators during the game that will commentate the game. And it's very much like watching any other sport. In between, they'll talk about the stats of the players and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I hope that the experience will change in a more unique direction in the future, where either the perspectives of the game changes once technology around AR and VR and the holograms, things like that improve in the future. I think that esports are more positioned to take advantage of things like that, being a digital game. And yeah, I know that we're always trying, esports industry is always trying to figure out how to get fans more involved, just like all sports are trying to figure out, but getting them more involved in the gameplay. I think another thing that's special about esports is, it's not really possible that you see a lot of 50-year-olds playing full contact football, but I think in 20 years or maybe less, you'll see a lot of 50-year-olds playing video games because they grew up playing video games and they enjoy it, and they'll be playing it with their kids and their grandkids and things like that. So I think that's something that's going to change. That's a little bit unique to esports is I think the age, you don't age out of an esport as much as you age out of a physical sport. So that'll be, I think, interesting to see. I think that's something we haven't seen in the past. It's like, what is it like to have a 50-year-old or 60-year-old, a 70-year-old playing the same sport that they're watching, on the weekends, they're watching the pros, but they're playing it by themselves on the weekdays. That's just not common with most traditional sports.
Well, that's good. There's hope for me in my advanced age that first of all, I won't be tackled if I play something. And second, that I can have the same kind of experience as hopefully my son will as he grows up. That's fantastic, Danny. I really appreciate you spending the time today and educating not only me, but all of our listeners on what esports truly means and what's happening in the industry. That is fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Danny. We learned so much. And also there's hope for Tim yet. He still may be an athlete.
No.
Yeah, you have a chance.
But thank you for giving me the opportunity to think that could happen.
I thought that was one of the most insightful conversations we've had on the podcast so far. And I'll tell you why.
Please.
I think that it is one of the tightest examples that we have talked about so far, where I feel like the infinite enterprise and esports are inextricably linked. And there is a clear need between the two, right? And that esports is going to benefit immediately.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Danny had some really fascinating linkages with the concept of the infinite enterprise, specifically around geographic location of servers and performance and distribution of players. So he talked about professional teams being formed in particular geographical centers because they're close to servers. Mm-hmm. And in the concept of the infinite enterprise, we should be able to have that experience no matter where we are. So whether you're in Los Angeles, whether you're in New York, or whether you're in, somewhere in Central Asia, for example, right? Being able to have that same experience is the concept of the infinite enterprise. So solving those problems and being able to bring that distribution of user into the experience is going to be the thing that allows companies to win and to solve these problems and to let the infinite enterprise enable those experiences.
Yeah. And as our chief technology officer, Nabil Bukhari, had stated when we first started and we kicked off the whole series of this podcast, whoever is going to be able to identify where they can win, where the needs are, and where the infinite enterprise will be able to take them, those are going to be the winners in all of this. Those who jump and seize on this opportunity, I think this is one of them. I mean, esports clearly very much has this need for the technology to develop. And because of the pandemic, it is developing faster and it's meeting their need. So whoever goes in on this space, they're going to win.
Yeah, it feels like a metaphor for the infinite enterprise when we look at esports, right? It's so well aligned to be able to deliver that experience. Danny talked about having a virtual camp, right? And right. Having virtual communities where these campers can have the same experience as if they were in a centralized location, camping together, as it were, where they can have coaching and where they can have mentoring and where they can see each other in some way. They're working on trying to figure out how to make that better when they're using chats and video chats and audio chats, but having AR and VR and we even talked about holography, right? To be able to make that experience so visceral and so real, no matter where you are. And there's an opportunity for the infinite enterprise to step up and address this use case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the words that I want to use here is community, right? And what was absolutely interesting about what he was talking about with the camps is that they're building a virtual community. And as one of our guests pointed out, Michelle Taffler, she came on and talked to us about Gen Z. Gen Z hasn't really missed a beat, according to her, because of the pandemic. So if anything, this has just really accelerated that adoption of building a virtual community, and the infinite enterprise enables that. And to your point, it'll be better holography. Everybody will be able to have that real camper experience in their own living room. It really won't matter where they are.
Yeah, so this is another opportunity to look at the use and the need and the experience driving the technology, rather than the technology being the big thing that drives the experience. So once again, another reinforcement for the concept of the infinite enterprise. I think that this has such a relationship when we look at the performance aspect of this from a technology standpoint, the access standpoint, the experience standpoint. This is such a great opportunity for the infinite enterprise to learn from esports.
Yep, absolutely. I think that esports is going to only be able to scale, and that it's only going to find its home in the infinite enterprise. And, it will become bigger than some of our existing competitive sports. It already has in some cases, but for Generation Z, this is going to be their space for competitive sports.
Yeah. And it's also a consumer experience, right? So it's everybody who plays it. And then there's everybody who's a fan of or participating or watching. They too want that experience. They want to have an immersive experience. And because this is digital, I think this is the key to that experience. You can do more with a digital environment than you can necessarily do with the physical environment. So yeah. I think that if we can find ways to bring the technology to solve the use case, the infinite enterprise could be a major part of esports going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm really excited to watch this space and see what they do next, because I think a lot of traditional competitive sports are going to be looking at esports to see how they evolve it in this continually distributed world and the infinite enterprise. So watch this space.
I agree 100%. Join us on the next episode of Inflection Points for a lively conversation with Kate Nadolny, SVP of Strategy, Operations and Innovation at PVH Corp. Kate talks about the seismic shifts within the retail world, how consumers are driving new experiences, and gives us a tantalizing glimpse into the potential future of infinite retail. If you'd like to find out more about the Office of the CTO at Extreme Networks, find us on LinkedIn and check out the Extreme blog at www.extremenetworks.com.